birthday to you.
It's cultural, Pastor
Happy
Tim.
birthday, happy
There's never enough
birthday,
greeting.
happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Pastor
Oh,
Tim again.
Happy birthday, Pastor Team.
thank you.
Thank
You're
you for teaching us on your birthday.
see how special you are. I'm teaching on my birthday. Your singing makes me want to cry because it hurt my ears. Thank you, brothers. Appreciate that. And thank you too for allowing me to adjust our meeting time. I had something I needed to take care of earlier. So we'll end at noon. We'll just have a shorter time today, and we won't really be covering that much as far as what I have to say. So I think it'll be fine. So let's get right to the sermon document assignment, and then I can answer questions. We can talk about your sermons a little more. All right. So I reposted the assignment. Let me adjust this. An example for the assignment, and I included in the example also a sermon draft example. So we'll just go through that with you guys as far as the sermon. This is the sermon document. This is the last assignment before preaching your sermons that you need to accomplish. And as I've noted with the other assignments, I again put the sessions that we covered in the workshop that address the topics regarding the sermon document. And as you can see, the sessions 14 to 17, those are focused on the sermon draft. And then session 18 on the full manuscript and just talking about what's included there. And then you can see, of course, the video links for those. So those are there for you as a reference if you need to go back and review. And what I was just going to do was just briefly show you an example for each of those, either the sermon draft or the full manuscript that you can submit for your assignment. Okay. So the format is, again, hopefully straightforward. I put here just for the psalm, I put the psalm itself and then the sermon concept and outline that we discussed for that, because that forms the basis for our sermon. Again, that's taking the author's what, why, how, as we discussed last week, and essentially now directing that toward our hearers, toward our audience. All right. And so this was the main point of the sermon, as well as the outline that was put together for this psalm. And then the sermon draft is essentially, if you remember back when we talked about this, is taking the body of the sermon, or the structure of the sermon, which is an introduction, the body of the sermon, and then the conclusion. Those three key elements of the sermon. And the introduction and conclusion are short. They're how you begin and how you end the sermon. The body of the sermon is the bulk of your sermon. And so with the sermon document, the draft, I mean, there were two documents I discussed with you. One was just, of course, the full manuscript. So that's where you just write everything out. The other one was sort of a draft, a bullet point draft of the sermon in order to prepare you for that sermon manuscripts. Because I know some of us sort of think that way, where it's easier for us to brainstorm ideas, to have more of a summary approach, a bullet point approach, as opposed to writing out in full form, paragraphs, etc. So we talked about this in the class, and I included this for those of you who think better that way, because I know sometimes for me it's hard to go from, okay, I have my sermon concept and outline, and then trying to think of, okay, how do I start the sermon and what do I write out? You know, if you've probably heard the expression writer's block, you know, where you sit down to write something out and it's hard to start. You can't think of what to say or how you want to say it, or All the thoughts are kind of jumbled in your mind. And so I know sometimes I experience that. So one thing that I do to help me is I come up with like what I call a sermon draft, which is not a full manuscript, but it sort of it helps to put some of the structure together for the sermon. So for example, in the sermon draft, I would take the introduction. That's the first part of the sermon, and just cover think of some ideas to include in my introduction, and then just put those down. So for example, in the introduction, in the example we went through in class, the one element of the introduction, right, is to gain our hearers' attention. That's a key part of the introduction, especially at the beginning. We want to draw people in, get their attention. And so I came up with several ideas here to how to do that. Whether it's a story, the story of paying homage to a king, discussing bad examples of worship in church, the story of Uzzah and how he did not treat the ark as holy, and just so I came up with a brainstorm, several ideas to use in my introduction to gain attention. And then another element in the introduction is to surface a need with the hearer. So again, I came up with several bullet points, a couple of quotes, a sermon that I heard where the preacher was very disrespectful to God, just showing the lack of respect and honor given to God when Christians approach him sometimes. So again, all of these, I'm not putting all of this in my introduction, but these are all ideas that come to my mind as I think about possibilities. All right. And then the transition to the text. So I had several different ideas here of how do I go from gaining the attention of my hearers and surfacing a need, and how do I transition then to the passage? And so these were some different ideas in how to do that, asking a particular question, making a statement about Psalm 99 being a blueprint for how we approach God. And then finally, I state the current sermon concept at the end of the introduction. Let's do homage to the holy. So what this is simply just recognizing the main elements of an introduction: gain hearers' attention, surface a need, transition to the text. Then I just came up with some ideas for each of those elements. And as I said, you'll see in my full manuscript, I didn't put all of this in my introduction. But what these did was gave me some ideas that then in the full manuscript, I wrote out in more detail. Okay? And so I think what I ended up doing was talking about, because I gave this sermon, when I first preached it, I preached it at the beginning of the calendar year. And so I think I used like a New Year's resolution kind of introduction in my particular case. And then for surfacing a need, I talked about these actually included all four of these, I think, in my introduction. And then, so you can see that going from these bullet point introductions, ideas, to the actual manuscript. Okay? But I think the key attribute of the sermon draft is just kind of writing down these ideas. It's more like a brainstorm, a structured brainstorm. That's probably a good way to put it. Okay? Where you just pray through each element here and then just say, okay, gain my hearer's attention. Now, what would be a good way to gain my hearer's attention on this topic of God's holiness, on this idea of how to approach God in worship, and then just whatever comes to your mind, okay? And sometimes you may even, from another sermon that you listen to on this psalm, that there may be a good example there for the introduction that you can include as well. Of course, give credit to that, okay? So that's
Pastor T,
yes.
sorry. So when we do sermon draft, we would also copy that format wherein several ways to give hearers attention, surface a need. Is that so?
Yeah, that would be my suggestion, is to have these four parts, because those are the four key parts of an introduction, and then just come up with ideas for each one.
One idea for each one.
Or several. I put several ideas here. Notice I've got 3, 4, I got 7 ideas to gain the hearer's attention. And I think I went just with one of them.
Pastor Tim, but you can actually put what you will actually preach about, or the exact one that you are going to deliver in your sermon,
Yeah, yeah. These are
right?
just ideas. This is before I write out the full manuscript.
So with the assignment that we are submitting based on this, for gaining hearers' attention, we'll write what we will actually be using in our preaching to gain the hearers' attention.
Oh, I see. You can do technically the sermon draft is just all your ideas. But if you want to
Okay.
just write out the actual sort of outline for your sermon, you could just put the one you're going to use.
Okay.
I'm fine either way.
All right, sir.
And just to emphasize, guys, you don't have to turn into me both a sermon draft and a full manuscript. Just turn into me one or the other.
Either. Okay.
Either one. All right. Now, when you preach, obviously that's going to be a full message. You're not going to preach bullet point number 1, bullet point number 2. But as far as the sermon document is concerned, you can give me either a sermon draft or a full manuscript. All right. And in your sermon draft, you can include all the ideas you come up with, or if you just want to put down the 1 or 2 that you're actually going to do, that you decided you want to do, that's fine as well. So for example, if I put all these ideas down and then I decide, okay, I'm just going to do these 2. And then I'm just going to do these and this. Okay, and this is actually what I'm going to have in my sermon. That's fine to do. Or you can just leave it with all the ideas in there. Does that make sense?
Pastor Ted,
Yeah.
what if to surface a need with the hearers are actually gaining their attention already? So can we skip
Yep.
with the gaining the hearers' attention step?
Yeah, you can combine them. So for
Combine,
example,
yeah.
you could say something like, brothers and sisters, have you noticed the lack of respect that God has given in our churches these days?
Yeah.
So that's the need,
Yeah,
and that's also the
that
attention
clearly get
grabber.
the attention.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm doing both there. Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. Oh, so we can combine them.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and then what you can do is just put, if you do that, just do this, surface.
Slash.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I often try to do that just to be efficient, but you can separate it out or combine it. The idea is, as long as it's important to have elements of both, grabbing attention and surfacing a need. And oftentimes, yes, you can surface a need at the same time as you grab the attention. So,
correct. Mm-hmm.
Or like, a recent survey showed that only 42% of Christians actually sing during a church service, or that, so that's kind of doing the same thing. All right. Any other questions on the introduction? And again, here, we're just looking at the sermon draft. You could, and I have the example here. This is my full manuscript. So you could also turn that in. Where basically this is the actual manuscript I put together. Notice here's the Dr. Ware statement, the David Wells quote. Let's see, how did I start this? Yeah, as the new year begins, so I went with the New Year's one. And then Dr.
The
Ware.
draft is better, Pastor Tim.
What's that?
The draft is better. Really better.
You like the draft better? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. That's why I said you can turn in either one. I wanted to see what you came up with between your sermon concept and outline and the actual preaching. I wanted to see you put together, and I think this will help many of you, because we need to stop and think about the structure. Some of us are don't use notes and are more, our thinking is, we don't use manuscripts, and that's fine. But I want to at least see, I think it's important that you do think through sort of the structure and the flow of your sermon, so that when you do get in the pulpit, there's it's easier to follow. It will be easier to follow you. So yeah, you can turn in the full manuscript to me or do this sermon draft. Okay, so this is the introduction for the sermon draft. And again, notice I highlighted there's the 4 key elements that you want to have in your introduction. I think that'll make it more effective. All right. Then the body of the sermon. And if you remember, the body of the sermon involves each of your outline points expanded. And the expansion is those 5 P's. If you remember, the point, the proof, the picture, the plan, and the problem. And so for the sermon draft, I try to come up with some ideas for each of those 5 P's. And so in the point, it's already stated. That's the outline point. So that one's easy. It's already done. The proof is now, what do I want to include in explaining that point, and proving that point, and showing that point from the text? Okay, so in my case, and I think I included about all of these in my manuscript, but I wanted to describe what this picture in verse 1 of God's aboveness, his transcendence, and explain what enthroned above the cherubim means, because that helps to see this exalted view of God that's being presented. And so I put in various things I wanted to make sure to use or to explain from the text that proves or shows the point. Okay? And then for picture, that's illustration. So in this case, I came up with a few ideas for potential illustrations in this point. All right? And I think I used a couple of them in the point. And then the plan, that's just the application. So I came up with a few ideas of different ways to help the people apply the passage. And I think I actually used all of these in my sermon as well. And then finally, the problem. And again, you don't have to have all of these in every point, but it's good to think through ideas for each one, because as you're doing that and as you're praying about it, as you're preparing the message, you may decide, you know what, I really don't have time to focus on the problem, or this problem, these really aren't things that people in my congregation will be concerned about, so I'm not going to do that for this point. Okay, but at least think of some ideas first, because you might come up with something, go, oh, you know what, or you might read another sermon, or think about someone brings up an issue, you go, you know, that's really something I think is needed for my congregation to hear, so I want to talk about that. All right. So, but I do suggest, you know, writing some ideas down for all 5 of these, all 5 P's. And again, the point and the proof are requirements. You've got to have a point and explain it from the text. All right. You can't skip that one. Okay. A lot of preachers do, but you can't. All right. If you're expository preachers, you have to explain from the text. But as far as the picture or the plan or the problem, that I will leave to you as you think through your whole sermon. Maybe you already have a number of applications in the next 2 points. So you think, you know, I don't really need any application here because I'm going to focus on it in the next 2 points. Or like I said, you may decide, these problems that I came up with really aren't an issue with people in my congregation, so I don't think I'll do those in this case. But I identify a problem in the next point. So once it's putting down all your ideas for all 5 P's and then doing that for each sermon point, and then you'll come back and decide, okay, which ones should I include, or which ones
for the final manuscript.
Yeah. So again, as I'm repeating this, so I apologize, but it's just to emphasize, this is just a brainstorm document. This is where you're putting all your ideas together so that they're put down. And then as you do that, you come back and you pray through it, and you'll have certain ones that you see connect together to include in your sermon. So I do the same thing for my second outline point. I state the point, and then I put in the various things I want to go through to explain that point from the text. and then some different ideas about the illustration, different ideas about application, and then one problem or question that I came up with from this text is, and this is one I think I addressed because I thought it'd be important. If we are saved by grace, why should we be concerned about pursuing holiness? Doesn't he make us holy? So just talk about that idea of sanctification, that we are saved and we're being saved, that the Great Commission is not only bringing people to Christ, but also growing people in Christ. And so I talk about that a little bit because I felt it was important to my audience. Okay? But it's the same, I'm rehashing the same process as the first point, just coming up with the ideas for the 5 Ps, just like I did in the first point. And then I turn back around, do the same thing on the third point, the 5 Ps. Okay?